The corn was orient and immortal wheat, which never should be reaped, nor was ever sown. I thought it had stood from everlasting to everlasting. Well, those are perhaps the most famous lines of Thomas Traherne, the 17th century poet, theologian, spiritual writer. They come from his centuries of meditations, which C.S. Lewis described as almost the most beautiful book in English. This, though, was a book that was never published in his lifetime, only came to light when it was discovered on a street book barrow in Whitechapel in 1897. When no one knew who Traherne was. His name had been completely forgotten. But since then, new manuscripts have come to light, some found almost by accident in libraries, one snatched from a burning rubbish heap in Wigan. And these writings have inspired musicians, poets, and artists. 20 years ago now, I and a group of fellow artists started going on a series of annual day-long pilgrimages to places associated with poets and painters who have inspired us. And these journeys are the subject of my new book, The Farther Away, and also of an exhibition that's at the moment at the Museum of Modern Art in Machynlleth, and will be coming to the Lavery in London in November. And two of those artists, Nicholas Mynheer and Thomas Denny, joining me here. So here we are. Hello, Tom. Hello, Nick.
Hello.
And we're very honoured to be joined by Dr. Julia Smith. Julia is the editor of the Oxford Traherne. She's at the moment writing a biography of Traherne. And she also, in fact, was involved in identifying a new Traherne manuscript that was discovered back in 1997. So I wondered, perhaps, Julia, you could just begin by, that's a rather wonderful thing to have been involved in. I wonder if you could begin just by telling us how that came about.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working on Traherne for many years, and one of the exciting things about working on Traherne is that, as Roger said, he's really only known to us now through the series of really exciting manuscript discoveries that have taken place during the course of the 20th century. And there were 8 manuscripts, and I'd been working on them. And although they'd all turned up most of them had turned up in very unexpected ways, I was completely unprepared for what I think was one of the most exciting pieces of post I've ever opened, when in 1996 I got a little airmail envelope with a little sheet of black and white photocopying in it from a colleague in the United States, who was Letitia Yendall, who was sadly since died. She was curator of manuscripts at the Folger Shakespeare Library. And she said, I was looking through some anonymous manuscripts in the library, and I came across something, and I just wondered, I'm not sure about this, but I just wondered if it might be Traherne's handwriting. And it was immediately obvious to me from the little black and white photocopy that it was Traherne's handwriting, and that it was a completely unknown work by Traherne. It was a poem called The Ceremonial Law, a long narrative poem based on Genesis and Exodus. And so I confirmed the identification. And I mean, you can't just say, oh yes, this is a Traherne manuscript. You have to find ways of demonstrating it, and we did that. I was in the process of doing this when the second most surprising thing of my life happened, when the phone went, and it was a colleague in Cambridge who said, Julia, I think I found a Traherne manuscript. And that was the late Jeremy Moore, who was also sadly since died, who was a fellow of Trinity College, Cambridge, who almost simultaneously had found another completely unknown Traherne manuscript in Lambeth Palace Library. And the clinching thing was that those two manuscripts were found on the centenary of the first Traherne manuscript discovery. So that was all exceptionally satisfying.
Yeah, it is an extraordinary story, really, isn't it? How all these things are.
And that's not the end
Yeah,
of it. There's been another one since.
really, yeah, gosh. So, well, I, I'd be really interested to hear a little bit more about those later on. But I thought we might, well, when we did this kind of Traherne pilgrimage, we started here in Oxford because in a way that's where the sort of Traherne paper trail sort of started, didn't it, in some ways? But clearly he was born in Hereford, and so I just wonder if you could just begin by telling us what we know, about his life in Hereford before he came to Oxford.
Yeah, because Traherne wasn't known very much as an author in the 17th century, it's a completely different situation from an author like Milton or George Herbert, where people knew at the time that they were really significant poets and began collecting information about them and anecdotes and so on. People knew that they were poets whom people in the future, posterity, would want to know about. That wasn't the case with Traherne. And so most of Traherne's life is not very well documented. And most of what we know, you have to go through quite a complex process of deduction to work things out from slightly indirect sources. So, accepting that that's the case, things that we can work out are he was born in about 1637 in the city of Hereford, within the city walls. His father was a shoemaker called John Traherne. People have been a bit disparaging about his father being a shoemaker. He wasn't a jobbing cobbler. He was a master craftsman who would have been a member of the Guild of Shoemakers. He had at least two apprentices. We know that from a rather odd, one of the few surviving contemporary anecdotes about Traherne is a rather odd story that he told to an acquaintance about how he had a vision of one of the apprentices wearing a red waistcoat. But that tells us that his father was a master craftsman and had two apprentices. He had a younger brother, Philip, about 3 years younger. I think we're going to be talking a bit later on about Traherne's well, I don't know, not exactly Traherne's experience of childhood, but Traherne's vision of childhood. And I think one of the really crucial things that we know about Traherne's experience of childhood is that it was not like the vision of childhood. 1637, when Traherne approximately was born, was a very bad year for Hereford. The harvest failed. There was plague. The city was struggling with taxation. And the next 7 or 8 years, when Traherne was growing up, were the build up to the civil wars. And, and that must have been very obvious. Traherne's father was in the local militia. That was a kind of a sort of voluntary, it was a kind of home guard, but in contrast with, kind of modern images of kind of dad's army, it was a completely opposite situation in the 17th century. You sent the riffraff to fight overseas, but if you wanted a force at home, they had to be respectable members of society who had a stake in preserving the status quo. So that also tells us something about the status of Traherne's father, who seems to have had some sort of officer status in this local militia. But the situation for the first 7 or 8 years of Traherne's life was very tense. It was very politically tense. There were soldiers training. There was visible conflict in the streets between what would become the two sides in the civil wars. In 1642, the beginning of the civil wars in England, for the next 3 years, Hereford was repeatedly invaded by opposing forces. It was besieged. There was poverty, there was destruction, there was billeting of soldiers in households that didn't want them. And this is the background to Traherne's childhood.
It's just very fascinating because one of the pictures that you've shown us is actually that picture of the gate, which obviously has in his vision of childhood, that's quite important. But actually, the walls and the gate were doubtless really important parts of the defence of Hereford at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the Wide Marsh Gate in Hereford, sadly no longer there. And Roger has read the best known sentence in Traherne, and I think perhaps the second best known sentence in Traherne is, "The green trees, when I saw them first through one of the gates, transported and ravished me. Their sweetness and unusual beauty made my heart to leap, and almost mad with ecstasy. They were such strange and wonderful things." And since this is the parish in which Traherne's family lived, that is probably the gateway through which he saw those strange and wonderful trees. But yes, it was also an important part of the defences. And you can just see in the picture that outside the gate there are a lot of houses. By 1645 they had all been demolished, so that as part of the defence strategy of the people inside the city, so that the invading Puritans couldn't use them for shelter. So that's a very it's a very ambivalent image, really.
Yes.
Julia, can I ask, Traherne would have known the Coningsby almshouses, which still exist, I believe.
Yeah.
And they were in existence in his time. And here's a rather convoluted artifact that connects, in a way, Traherne and myself. Here it is. I don't know whether you can see this gold
Is
thimble.
it a thimble?
It's a thimble, yes. And it belonged to another Letitia Coningsby, whose grandfather built the Coningsby almshouses. And then Letitia married Edward Denny, which is why I've got her thimble.
Oh, goodness.
So
how extraordinary.
That's the kind of obscure connection that gives me a lot of pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. I must search Traherne's works for occurrences of the word thimble.
Yeah. So the other picture, Julia, you've given is All Saints Church, and that was in the parish as well.
Yes, that was almost certainly Traherne's parish church, and he was almost certainly baptized there. Again, during the civil wars, it was used for storing munitions. I mean, all of these things were the sites of conflict. There was conflict about, whether they were allowed, because the use of the Book of Common Prayer was prohibited in 1645, and Hereford was a royalist city. In fact, it's very interesting that the records of All Saints show that they actually bought a new copy of the Book of Common Prayer after its use had been prohibited, which is one of many kind of tiny signs of resistance to the ruling regime in Hereford.
I mean, this puts a rather different kind of complexion, doesn't it, on the sort of vision of childhood that Traherne has in his writings. I mean, it makes it more extraordinary in some ways, doesn't it? That actually because his actual childhood must have had, I mean, at least some sort of background. I mean, children aren't necessarily, I mean, don't sort of see conflict and war quite in the way that adults do. But even so,
No,
um,
no.
um, I mean, well, I mean, perhaps we come on to Nick at this point, because I mean that. Having said that, that vision of childhood is incredibly important in Traherne, and it comes in a lot of his writing. I mean, we've not only the bits we've quoted in the centuries, but in poems and other things, particularly a poem called the Salutation. Nick, I mean, that was the inspiration of one of your very well-known sort of sculptures. Perhaps you could just tell us a bit about how that sculpture came about.
Well, I was introduced to Traherne by Finzi. I mean, I'd never read any of Traherne until I listened to Finzi, and there was a year. It was I think 1998, perhaps 1999, when I spent literally the whole year just listening to setting of Finzi's De Natalis, and in particular Salutation. And it just absolutely haunted me. And then I got some, I started sketching some ideas for producing a sculpture. And then the most extraordinary thing, I was commissioned by a lady who'd commissioned work from me before and always sort of donated it anonymously. And she said she had an idea for the sculpture, and it was Traherne's Salutation. And it just seems bizarre even saying it now. It just seems so unlikely. But anyway, I just thought this was meant to be. So I set about producing a sculpture, which for me, I mean, it came out, whilst it was inspired by the Salutation, it came from these words: all appeared new and strange at first, inexpressibly rare and delightful and beautiful. I was a little stranger, which at my entrance into the world was saluted and surrounded with innumerable joys. It seemed as one brought into the estate of innocence. All things were spotless and pure and glorious, yea, and infinitely mine. I knew not that there were any sins or complaints or laws. I saw all in the peace of Eden. Heaven and earth did sing my Creator's praises, who could not make more melody to Adam than to me. Is it not strange that an infant should be heir of the world and see those mysteries which the books of the learned never unfold? I found this absolutely haunting, these words, and the sculpture I produced tried to express that. It was a sense of seeing the joy of creation, perhaps for the first time. So through the eyes of a child, or perhaps through the eyes of an ancient person who beholds the Creator for the first time. So it's this sense of sort of joy, illimited, looking up. And after I'd carved this piece, then I think Roger had the idea of this, perhaps doing an exhibition with a number of artists, and we would call it the Salutation. And so this piece would then be shown in this exhibition in the church in Oxford. And this is the catalogue for the exhibition. And Roger managed to find... Where did you find this, Roger?
Yeah, I just went along to the Bodleian and asked if I could look at the Traherne manuscripts that they'd got there, which obviously Julia knows very well. And there were two. I think it's a long time ago now, but I think Julia, you can. There are two books, and one of them was his brother Philip's book, wasn't it? And Thomas seems to have taken it over and it got when he came to Oxford, and there are all kinds of little sort of trying out his signature and sort of things like that, and sort of notes from lectures and
yeah, it's just a student notebook. Yeah.
And even the sort of, yes, rather bawdy poem, I think, in the acrostic or something. And then the other one has got the copyings out of the two poems. Is that right? Or is it the same one? I couldn't remember now.
Well, there are actually four Bodleian manuscripts altogether,
Right.
but this is there is one with a sequence of poems in it, which includes these two.
Yes. And they're very kind of, so yes, you can sort of see these little limbs, those eyes and hands, which here I find. It's just a lovely poem, that the sort of salutation. It made a very nice sort of theme for the exhibition, which was a kind of millennium exhibition. So it was, it just seemed to fit that as well. And sort of Mark Cazalet and Richard Kent Webb also took part in this. We hadn't met Tom at that point, otherwise I'd have got him involved as well. But that wasn't the end of your, because you did another sculpture as well.
Well, I did that sculpture we just saw was then offered as a gift to. It was publicised in the ACE Bulletin, Art and Christianity Inquiry, and eventually it found its way to Newcastle Cathedral to live. And their idea was that they were going to set up a centre for children's spirituality. And because this is, I don't know if they ever got round to doing that, but the sculpture is only about a metre high. And I like the idea that children viewing the sculpture would hopefully run their hands over the stone. So it's a sort of a small child's height, really, maybe just less than a metre. So it's in Newcastle Cathedral. But the strange thing is, that same year, then I was contacted by a Methodist trust who wanted to commission something to mark the millennium. And I hadn't got this out of my blood, I don't think, this salutation. So I suggested that as a theme, and then produced a much larger version, which is now in Thetford Forest. And you see it's sort of weathered rather. It's in the Linford Arboretum in Thetford Forest. And while I was carving this, I heard about a very tragic death of a small boy in this forest, and we contacted the police, and they contacted the family, and it was duly dedicated to the memory of Thomas Marshall, and it's there to this day.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. It's I mean, it's quite interesting. They look quite different, don't they? The two. This is much what is about. How big is this second one?
Yes, it's quite. I mean, this is about metre and a half, maybe a bit larger than that. So it's on a plinth, and it's actually set so that it looks up to the east of the rising sun. Right. I like the idea of this figure, these huge hands, almost like a sort of flower coming to bloom in the presence of the sun, and in the presence of God.
Yeah. Oh.
And actually, you can just see that well, you can't see in the hands, but you can see in the side of the body. There's the marks of the crucifixion.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, the Traherne pilgrimage we did, I can't remember how many years ago this was now. It must have been about, was it 2010, something like that? It may have been.
Yes, I think it was.
Yeah. Well, it coincided with was it the 500th anniversary of Brasenose, something like that, because we went Well, actually, no, before I move on to this is your house, isn't it?
Yes, yes. I live on the edge of Otmore, which is a wonderful sort of wetland, an ancient landscape on just northeast of Oxford, and it's dominated by the sky, and so I'm very aware of the stars and the moon and the sun moving over the house. And what better than a piece of Traherne to decorate their house? In the 17th century spelling, and one of the neighbours wondered if I was dyslexic, and asked if I realised spelt it incorrectly.
Come and change the spelling for you. Anyway, so well, when we did this this kind of pilgrimage thing, we started in we went to Brasenose, which Traherne came to. Was he 16? I mean, quite
15.
15. Goodness me, gosh, that's extraordinary. And so, I mean, Julia, can you give us an idea of what's well, more about what his life would have been here when he came up?
Yeah, well, 15 was young even in the 17th century. It was probably the first time in his life Traherne had left Herefordshire. He was the only student. I mean, I feel this is in kind of important context to what it was like for him arriving there, that he was the only student admitted to Brasenose on that day. Because again, in the 17th century, you didn't have the kind of modern system of all the students arriving at the same time. They arrived throughout the year, although most arrivals tended to be in the spring. Often they came in small groups from various regions, but Traherne arrived on his own at the age of 15. There is what I find a very poignant record in Brasenose, which is it's a list of everybody currently in the college in order of status. And it starts with the principal, and it goes down through the fellows in order of seniority, and then it goes through the students in order of seniority, and then right at the bottom, very last name, Traherne has written his own name, and it's very small, and it looks like a schoolboy's handwriting, and it says P. Traherne. And I feel that very much evokes what the experience of arriving there must have been for him. It was, although his father wasn't kind of badly off, he was a tradesman, and going to Oxford was expensive. Students at Oxford in the 17th century were classified by social class. According to your social class, you would wear different gowns, you'd sit at a different table, you'd eat different food, you'd be charged different fees. I mean, the downside was, the more important you were, the more money you had to pay. But Traherne would have been very much at the bottom of that scale, so much so that he was clearly he must have been struggling financially, because he hadn't been there very long before he was given the role of servitor, which means that he got paid a small amount and subsidized the small amount for waiting on other students at table. And it would have been his responsibility to collect up all the dirty plates and take them to the buttery, and also to keep a record of how much bread and ale the other students consumed. So yeah, so he was young. He was younger than most people, and at Oxford, although he wouldn't have been at the bottom of the social scale in Hereford, but in the Oxford hierarchy, he was pretty close to being at the bottom of the social scale.
So
he would have had.
Sorry. No, I was thinking, because when he arrived, presumably this was after the end of the Civil War, but when in the middle of the Commonwealth. So it would have been a very different kind of Oxford from.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, the principal and the fellows were Puritan nominees. The royalists had all been turned out, and the fellows had been replaced with new ones who were politically sympathetic to the government. Yeah. And what students did was very closely controlled. They, on arrival, every student would have been assigned to a tutor. Still the same thing. I mean, what is still called a moral tutor, but I mean, they really did mind their morals then. Every tutor would have had a small group of students. They would have been quite likely all to sleep in the tutor's room. The tutor was responsible for all of their money. Such funds as they had were paid to the tutor, and if they wanted to buy something, they had to ask the tutor if they could have, sixpence to buy a textbook or whatever. They were supposed to talk in Latin. I mean, in college, in normal conversation, if they were in hall. They had to attend lectures. I mean, obviously there were kind of common components of student life. They had to attend lectures, they had reading lists. They did a lot of what was called disputing, where one student would have to defend a certain position in Latin, and then another student would oppose it. And Traherne must have participated a lot in that. He spent 3 years being a student at Oxford, being an undergraduate, took his BA. The other thing that was different was that after you'd taken your BA, after you'd got the degree, you weren't expected to leave. You still had responsibilities in the university. And there were still other things which, although in one sense you've got your BA, you had to do other things. You had to preside over some of these disputations and so on. So Traherne remained in Oxford until, we think, the end of 1657, when he was presented to Credan Hill. Just like to read a time. Traherne doesn't say much about his time in Oxford. I just want to finish describing that by reading one of the few things that he does say, that he refers to himself as, "I, who have been nourished at universities in beautiful streets and famous colleges, and am sent thither from God Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth, to teach immortal souls the way to heaven."
I mean, despite sort of all this thing of, it's very interesting sort of contrast, really, isn't it? We talked at the beginning about, how Hereford was actually in the middle of civil war when he had these kind of visions of childhood, and here in Oxford it was, he started right at the bottom of the of the sort of kind of social thing, but one still gets the sense that he was incredibly clever, but also quite a sort of effervescent sort of personality. I mean, he talks, doesn't he, about his proneness to sort of go on talking or something like
yeah, absolutely. Yes, I can. Too much openness and proneness to speak are my disease. I'm not sure about this, but he says that in heaven we will all be infinitely communicative and we will all be talking all the time. I have to say, I'm not. Here in this world, our lives must be intermingled with speech and silence, but in heaven, it's all going to be speech.
Right. Well, when we went round Brasenose, they had this exhibition which included this book, Christian Ethics, which I think was actually, he never actually saw it in print, did he? I think it was one of them.
No, that's right. He took it to the. He submitted the manuscript himself, but he died while the book was in the process of being printed.
So yes, well, I mean, he then went back to Greenhills just outside Hereford. And we also then sort of followed in his footsteps and set off after going around Brasenose. We set off to Hereford, where I think, Tom, you were waiting for us. I think you met us there, didn't you? As
I think
sort of,
so, yes. I think
yes.
mm.
And you took us into the the cathedral, where the ordinary chapel is, where you'd got these extraordinary Traherne windows. But perhaps you could, before we look at them, perhaps you could just tell us how that came about.
Yes, it was one of a number of projects that the Dean of Hereford at the time, Michael Taverner, instigated. So he called it something like Saints of Hereford, saintly people associated with Hereford. And the cathedral commissioned a number of works of art to do with these people. One of them was Cantilupe. Remind me, he was a 14th century figure, I believe, but I can't quite remember what was saintly about him. Perhaps Julia can.
No, I'm afraid not. No,
Yeah.
Traherne would have known because there
Yes,
is a medieval stained glass window of St. Thomas Cantilupe in Creddon Hill
in
Church.
Creddon Hill, yes, of course. He would have known those windows and would have known the meaning of Cantilupe's importance. But yes, so Traherne was one of the people who was to be celebrated, and I was asked by the dean to think about making a design for those two windows. I think Michael Taverner was keen on me doing it. He knew he wanted me to do it because we'd worked together at Tewkesbury, where he'd been previously. And so I was asked to think about it. But Michael Taverner also asked a number of people who knew Traherne intimately to suggest important themes in his work that might be celebrated in the window, well, the windows. And so we sort of gathered together in the windows different aspects of Traherne's life. Of course, they're all four are connected. All four lancets in the chapel are connected, but there's a sort of assemblage of passages and ideas within each one of the four sections of the windows. And one of the things about stained glass that's I think very important is to value the context. And in the case of the proposed position for the stained glass celebrating Traherne, that context was very precious and beautiful in being a tiny, intimate space within Hereford Cathedral. So part of a great building, but in its own right, miniature and extremely accessible. So in thinking about the windows, I knew that they were going to be a self-contained thing. They of course would relate to other works of art in the cathedral, but would be seen on their own, but also glimpsed through the early 16th century screen of the Audley Chapel, which retained some traces of medieval colouring, red and green, which in a sense was one pointer towards the overall character of the colour in the windows that I designed. So that as one glimpses them from the later chapel, they do connect with what one's looking at them through. This image shows the two windows slightly closer together than they are in reality. So they've been slightly brought together. There are two windows, a left-hand window and a right-hand window with a bigger space between. But as this image shows, that they were designed as a single thing as well as designed as a series of individual things. Incidentally, for some reason, this image is showing the darker colors as rather excessively dark. For example, in the far left-hand, rather green window, there's some rather rich violet in underneath the shadows of the trees, which is showing as black. I'm just mentioning that in case anyone feels they're excessively dark in looking at them. So, yes, so there are visual connections between the four in color and in the verticality of some strong movements within each of the four lancets. So there's a sort of reiteration, a visual reiteration as one goes through the four. But starting thematically from the left-hand one, the green one, in a way that one expresses in my mind the sort of tumbling urgency of Traherne that you were talking about, Julia, his proneness to rapid and continual speech. And there's something about the character of his verse that sometimes feels as though it's uttered whilst running. And so I felt that a running figure running through the cornfields with a sense of urgency and delight would express something about Traherne or something about how I have felt about reading his poems and Centuries of Meditation and other things. So there's a running figure running through a cornfield, and he's running towards the green trees, a pair of oaks, and then beyond an orchard on a knoll, a very Credden Hill type knoll. The landscape of Hereford has that lumpy, deeply wooded character. And then in the foreground, a pool, the pool in which love must first fill us before we can then offer it to others. Down the sides of the window of that lancet and of the others, there are small nodules of colour that are sometimes simply colour, but are sometimes contain tiny imagery, which is in one respect about Traherne's valuing of the tiny, but also about sort of entering into the 17th century imagination on my part. So I had in mind things like stump work, caskets, embroidered with creatures of arbitrary size as one looks at them in the embroidery. So such things fill the borders of the four parts of the two windows. And then the next one, the cross, a tree set on fire with invisible flame. So it's somewhere between a cross and a tree and a fire and an illumination. And rising from the cross, a bird, a phoenix. I can't remember at this moment, Julia, the phoenix reference that
Yeah, it's a bird of paradise. It's Felicity is a bird of paradise so strange that she can scarce fly amongst men without losing some feathers.
yes, lovely.
But I think there is also a phoenix passage, which is a different one about the phoenix rising from her own ashes.
Yes, a sort of resurrection idea that could be seen as right for rising up from the cross. And then the creatures and scenes of combat and suffering and the sort of creation scattered around the foot of the cross, which I think is another passage where he's listing and delighting in a leopard and a bird, and talking about conflict and talking about anxiety and sadness. And then the other red one, the other central one in this image, is about feeling at one with the world. You never enjoy the world aright till the sea itself floweth in your veins, till you are crowned with the sun and the stars. Those aren't the correct words. So this standing figure represents that idea of, I mean, it could be Traherne or it could be us, that idea of being totally entangled in creation, both in a huge way, the sea itself flowing in your veins, and in considering a drop of water or a river and seeing God in those things too. Yes, that perhaps is a single image that's about that centrality of being at one with creation in Traherne's work. And then the right-hand one, we are looking in whilst a child looks out, and the edge of the gateway is coming towards us. That strange green vertical on the right-hand side is the gate that's opened. So, as I say, we are looking in, and Traherne, in first seeing the green trees, is looking out, but also seeing with astonishment and joy the people around him on the streets of Hereford, young men and maidens, and the venerable immortal cherubim and tumbling children. So there's a still figure at the center of this lancet, which is set in a Hereford streetscape, surrounded by that which he observes, including the dust and the stones of the street, being as precious as gold, which, for my part, has been something that I've sort of carried intensively and obsessively into all my other windows. The idea of looking very intensely at tiny things at one's feet and valuing and noticing them. And then the entirety of the upper tiny triangles and quatrefoils above the four windows are about weather images from Traherne. I think the green one on the right is about dawn, and the blue one on the left is about night, and then the little tiny ones are about rain or waterfalls. And I think we've got some details, haven't we, Roger?
Yes. So this is Cretan Hill, isn't it? You were saying?
Yes. So that's a glimpse of the tower at Cretan Hill, which and an ancient oak tree, such as one sees at Moccas Park, for example, trees that were alive in Traherne's time and are still alive now. I love to insert particularities of a place into a window to further connect it with where it has been housed. And what's next? Yes, so that's a hill at dawn, and in one of the tiny traceries at the top.
Yeah, so they're lovely. There's the little bits. That's, yes, what is that, Hereford itself?
Yeah, so that's a glimpse of Hereford, the city as one sees it from perhaps Cretan Hill, with the two spires framing the cathedral tower. And yes. And here,
crucifixion, is it there?
yes, so here, sort of at rather arbitrary scale, There's an orchid on the right-hand side, adjacent to a bonfire, and then two men fighting with swords, and then a fruit tree and a deer coming down, and a bush, an illuminated bush, and a leopard. So all of these things mentioned and valued, and their glory celebrated in Traherne.
I mean, you're saying about the kind of tumbling nature of Traherne's prose, which is, which I mean, is I mean, I don't. Did you feel this when you were commissioned? Because it just seems. I mean, I can't quite think of this in the how this relates to your other windows, but it just seemed to sort of fit to your. I mean, this sort of theme seems to have gone through your work ever since then, but maybe it did before that as well. It was just a
Yes, I think it probably did before that. I think the very first window, sort of quite big commission that I made, starting in 1985 to 1995, was for a series of windows in a church in Cheltenham, which were about parables from the Gospels, but parables in which landscape is the vehicle for the idea. So the sheep lost and found, consider the raven, the fig tree, and so on. So thinking about landscape in such terms, yes, has been part of my work and still in stained glass all the way. But I did feel very in tune with Traherne. I just felt so terribly pleased and privileged to be able to make something about him that would be a kind of visual parallel to an extent of what he wrote. Yes, some of the details, yes. So I think probably I quoted earlier a river or a drop of water, an apple or a sand. God knows infinite mysteries in these, something along those lines. Yeah, and then tiny creatures like ants are sometimes mentioned. I expect beetles are too, Julia, but I decided they could feature anyway.
Traherne loved insects, which is quite interesting. I mean,
Yeah,
an ant is a great miracle in a little room.
yeah.
And I suppose, I mean, didn't talk about this. I mean, when he was at Oxford, it was actually exactly at the same time that sort of Hooke and people were sort of doing these microscopic sort of studies.
Yes, yes.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, his work is just full of the. I mean, there's a very interesting kind of scientific sort of fascination that Traherne has as well, isn't it?
Yes, seeing the wonders in miniature and in vastness.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean there is an extraordinary and very long passage in the Kingdom of God, which is one of the more recently discovered works, where Traherne is talking about a fly, which he talks about this iridescent green fly being a king of creation. You know, he sits on a leaf, which is his throne, and he goes into extraordinary detail about this.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I mean it's very fascinating actually, all this new work. I mean these new sort of texts of Traherne that are sort of coming to light. I mean I think Tom's windows and Nick's sculptures are must-see works, whether you're interested in Traherne or not. And I mean, you can see that both the sculptures are both in public places, and the windows are in this. I mean, if you didn't know about them actually in the cathedral, you wouldn't necessarily, because it's quite tucked away, isn't it? But they're.
Yes. But that's very appropriate, I think.
Yeah.
Needing to be discovered, just like, I mean, there's been so much finding, both in what Traherne wrote and in the discovery of him. So,
Yes.
in the discovery of him, I mean, he himself discovered, and then his own work was discovered in recent times.
Yeah.
So I think it's apt that a work of art about him needs to be found.
Yeah, and people do find it, and people are always telling me that they first came to reading Traherne's writings through seeing the windows.
Good,
Well, that's
good.
lovely. I mean, Julia, if people, because perhaps some people who are listening to this um, haven't come across Traherne before, and if that's the case, where should people, if they want to read Traherne, where should they start? And if they want to learn more about him, where would you recommend?
Yeah, there's not a perfectly satisfactory answer to that at the moment, because although a lot of the wonderful recently discovered works are available in print, they're only available in extremely expensive editions that new readers coming to Traherne are not going to want to buy or have access to. So I think there is a gap. I would love to say, go and read Inducements to Retiredness, for example, which is Traherne's meditations on the merits or otherwise of living alone, and Commentaries of Heaven, which is an alphabetical encyclopedia of felicity, and thought by many people to be one of Traherne's finest works, but not available in an edition which is accessible to the general reader. So I think what I'd say is there is an anthology edited by Denise Inch
Yes,
called
I've moved it up
Happiness and
now. You can see it.
Happiness and
Which has got Tom's
Holiness.
picture on the on the
Yeah,
cover. And
yes, as many books about Traherne now do. Um, yeah, so I think that is a good introduction. But everything in it is anthologized. So if you want to read a whole work, I think Centuries is still a good place to start, in spite of all the new discoveries. Traherne's Select Meditations is also available in a relatively inexpensive paperback. One day, when the Oxford Traherne edition is finished, OUP have mentioned the idea of doing cheaper and more accessible editions, perhaps based on that. But don't wait that long. Go and read something now.
so, I mean, this is quite a big question, but obviously all these manuscripts have come to light over the last sort of 100 years or so, but quite a lot of them quite recently, actually. I mean, in the last 40 or so years, and they've obviously greatly expanded our sort of understanding of Traherne. And I mean, can you give us some sort of idea of how of what they've added to our picture of Traherne? I mean, I remember I just started reading the Centuries, and so these new works came as quite a revelation. But how have
Yeah.
they?
Yeah, I think they've changed understanding of Traherne massively, although I don't actually think they've changed kind of popular perceptions of Traherne massively, because it's difficult to get access to them. But it's expanded the range of different types of writing. I mean, it's made it very clear that Traherne wrote in and was at home in many more genres than we had thought. We didn't know before the new discoveries that, for example, he wrote narrative poetry, which is also quite dramatic. And which has got the voice of the Israelites, crossing the Red Sea, for example. So, I mean, that's a kind of completely new literary side to Traherne that we didn't know about. I mean, I think it also makes it very clear that Traherne was much more engaged with um, the kind of things that were going on in his own lifetime, in a way. I mean, I think the Centuries and the poems which were discovered first gave rise, I think, to a perception, which is not right, that Traherne was in some way isolated from his own times. I mean, clearly he has got a timeless quality, but it's not because he didn't engage with what was going on at the time. And indeed, if he hadn't engaged with what was going on at the time and thought about what was happening in his own age, he wouldn't have had a timeless quality. So it shows, I mean, Roger mentioned scientific interests, and that's something which comes out very strongly in Commentaries of Heaven. There is a long article about atom. There's an article about astronomy. There's an article about air. We've got an account of doing various experiments. He gives an account of somebody who did a kind of natural history experiment with some ants. So all of these things, in a sense, we can see the seeds of them in the works that we already knew about. But it confirms that Traherne was a person of much wider knowledge, interests, understanding, engagement with what was going on in all sorts of ways. And that, important though his vision of childhood is, it wasn't the only thing that he was interested in.
But he managed to achieve so much in such a short life.
It's absolutely incredible. You would not think it was possible. And I mean, I am also absolutely convinced that the Traherne manuscripts that we've got, and we've now got 11 of them, and they are almost all in Traherne's own handwriting, and that in itself is a fascinating resource because of what it tells you about how he worked and who he worked with and so on. So, I mean, they are an absolutely fascinating resource. They all turned up in a surprising and arbitrary and unlooked for way. And I'm absolutely convinced that there are more of them out there.
It's a wonderful prospect. I mean, one of the things that struck me, just sort of reading the anthology of some of the texts, was that obviously he'd grown up at a time when the Church of England had been abolished, and the sort of prayer book had been was no longer sort of current, and he started out as a Puritan minister, but then became ordained and became actually a really sort of passionate about the English church, what we'd call the Anglican church. And in a way, he's, the Anglican church is not in the easiest position as it is today. But I mean, Traherne really believed in that this was a really important aspect of, it was central to the way that Christianity should develop. And he's not only the kind of poet of Anglicanism, he's actually passionate of sort of establishing an Anglican or a kind of English church identity, isn't he?
I think there is a distinction there that what Traherne and what Traherne was passionate about was a national church. When he was a Puritan, Presbyterianism was the national church. I mean, you referred to him being ordained. I mean, that was obviously as an Anglican clergyman. It's pretty likely that he had previously been ordained as a Presbyterian. And I think what Traherne really believed in was that everybody in the nation should belong to the same church. And so it wasn't, I think, that he had a kind of change of heart. And indeed, it would have been very convenient if he'd done so just at the point where there was a regime change. But I think the thing that Traherne really believed in was that everybody should belong to the same church. And I mean, he refers to what a beautiful thing this is, how they move together like a united army. And that was what he wanted. And I think he saw after the Restoration that the Church of England and the Anglican Church was going to be that church. And so that was what he espoused.
Do you think, Roger and Julia and Nick, do you think that Traherne was interested in and valued the works of art and the buildings that were being created in the second half of the 17th century in the Anglican Church? which are so distinctive and interesting. I mean, obviously, lots of college chapels are contemporary with him at Oxford and Cambridge, but also there's quite a sprinkling of very interesting and very particular Gothic survival churches, Gothic revival churches that are contemporary with him. And I wonder if there's any time at which he referred to new church buildings as something exciting and beautiful.
I
And he,
can't.
I was
Sorry,
just going to say,
Roger.
he contributed to Brasenose, didn't the chapel there at the fitting out of it? So that was something.
Yes.
Oh, did
Yeah.
he? Yes.
Yeah. When Traherne was at Brasenose, the chapel which is now there had not been built.
Hmm.
After Traherne had left Brasenose, they had a building fund, and Traherne contributed 20 shillings to it, which was quite a lot of money. And he would have seen it subsequently when he went back to Oxford, certainly to take his BD. It wasn't finished, indeed wasn't. It was only just started when he took his MA. He certainly expresses great admiration for Hereford Cathedral, but that, of course, had been there for a very long time.
Yeah.
So I can't think of anything that he said about new buildings. Actually, no, I'm just looking up his poem Churches, and it does say, and actually, Tom, I'd not noticed this before, but that it begins, those stately structures which on earth I view, to God erected, whether old or new. So actually, that's a very interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very nice point, perhaps to come to an end. I don't know if unless there's anything. But this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. I think we could go on talking about Traherne for a long time, as there's so much richness to be discovered. And so I hope if people haven't read Traherne, you will go to. There are quite a lot of editions of the centuries, aren't there? And there are some.
There are. Yeah, indeed.
So that is probably the place to start. And the thing about the centuries is it's actually quite difficult. I mean, I think quite a lot of people have found this to read it directly through, because it's so rich. It's almost like sort of drinking liquid gold or something. You have to almost take it a little bit at a time. But once you start, it's you don't want to stop. Well, I thought. I'm going to, at the end of our pilgrimage round, well, actually we did various things. We went out to Creedon and we saw a sort of wonderful field that features in a, what was that poem, Tom? You took us to.
Yes, I can't remember. We went to the River Lug.
Yes, that's right.
Near Lugwardine, because I know there's somewhere where he mentions it.
Yes, he does, with a moon sort of.
Yes.
Wonderful
poem.
Yeah.
His brother was put out to a wet nurse in Lugwardine.
Right.
And yeah, he talks about following the. But I suppose that the thing that actually I found brought me sort of closest to Traherne on that exhibition was when we actually were going towards Creedon, and we went past the walls of Hereford, which are the walls themselves are sort of still there. And if I can find it again, you showed us that wonderful sort of picture of the gate. And when you go there now, it's much more disappointing. So you can just see it on the far right hand side. You can just see a little bit of the wall.
The stump of wall there.
The stump of the wall. I mean, this is more extensive on either side. So I mean, and you can walk around passages of the wall, but the gates themselves have gone. And what you see is not the. I mean, there are some trees there, but there's also the A49, which is not so.
No, it doesn't make your heart to leap.
It doesn't. But having said that, you can see a little traffic light there at on the left-hand side, and when it sort of blinked to green, it just somehow sparked kind of in my mind's eye a picture of what Traherne was talking about. So let me so thank you all for again a wonderful conversation, and Nick for joining us from France, and so it's been really great fun. And let me end by reading you this poem. A gate, a door, a glimpse beyond the walls of all the choking traffic of our lives, a vision of the world before the fall, or out beyond the time of tears and sighs. A gate stands at the ending of the world, the great trees out beyond it, strange and new, quicksilvering the light which light winds turn, a depth of green against a depth of blue. A tree at the beginning of the world, a story before time, yet just begun, a depth of green against a depth of blue, is like a seraph standing in the sun or in the ocean, in each stone and leaf, a voice within the depth of all delight, which warns until you go beyond yourself, you never will enjoy the world aright. Until in God, who makes the stars his jewels, you sing, rejoice, and find your true delight, as kings in scepters, misers in their gold, you never will enjoy the world aright. A gate, a door, a glimpse beyond the walls, beyond the choking traffic of the street, are seraphs scything fields of orient corn and harvesting the bright, immortal wheat.